Good morning. Welcome. This is Angela Coulter, your Consciousness Transformation Ascension Guide, originator of Trinity Energy Progression, bringing you this week's Living the Shift. So, took an unintended week off last week. Was actually originally intending on taking this week off, so I was like, I guess I'll just, because this is since we took off on Ascended World. So, anyway, I was just like, okay, I'm just gonna do this, and um, there's a topic that's come up a lot, and it has to do with how we like judge. So if you look at what's going on in the collective right now, like we have a lot of judging going on, a lot of triggering, a lot of people like pointing the fingers, a lot of people trying to control others, a lot of people trying to fight being controlled. And there's so many, like, there's just so, like, we're just so caught up. We're so mired down in judgment. Good morning, Michael. We're so mired down in judging others right now. And, like, and it doesn't even matter what it is. It's whether it's political, abortion, not abortion, whether it's mask or no mask, vaccinated or not vaccinated, or um, whether somebody's mowed their lawn or not, in the neighborhood enough to your liking. Yeah, there's just so many things that we spend all of this energy judging others with, right? And then we have things that are presented with us to us that we think, well, how do we, you know, how do we see ourselves from another's perspective? Or how do we see another from our perspective? And, it was funny because it came up in a good conversation I was having with my husband about seeing, like, in a particular interest group that we belong to, seeing where people are very different in perspective, and how to maintain acceptance, right? Even if our personal views or experiences or preferences are very different than theirs, which pretty much sums up everything, like the same thing that I just said about, we've lost that in our consciousness collectively recently, like especially in this past couple of years with all the COVID stuff. And I mean, and we'll look at what we've had, one thing after the other. We had the Black Lives Matter, we have all kinds of LGBTQ stuff, we have all kinds of things, like, and it seems like what keeps on getting vomited up to the surface is truly um, where we still have so many triggers about separation and exclusion, and that person's not me, and look at what they're doing, and so, when you look at it in the perspective of like what my husband was talking about, and you look at it in this perspective though, but the key is to look at somebody, okay, so as someone who is extremely pro-choice and, individual empowerment and stuff like that, I can look at those who are really against abortion, and having all this stuff going on in our political pool in our country. And so, for me, that's where it would really be my trigger, right? So I'm like, okay, so let me look at that. Why am I triggered? And so then we look at the trigger, which is good. That's step one, is why am I triggered? The second step is not to accept my own trigger, right? But also then to see those who are reflecting, giving us the gift, because it is a gift of reflecting back that trigger to us, and saying, well, let me see things from their perspective. What what might that be? And then, like, and how do we do that? The question is, how do we do that? When we start coming to this perspective of us all being divine consciousness, and we're all just different facets of the same consciousness that we've embodied to explore the separation and exclusion, then we realize that, it's sort of like that big, I always think of the big, family tree, coming back to one singular source, which is, universal consciousness. And so we're all a part of that consciousness. And if we've embodied and we have expressed different aspects of separation through different individuals, then it was perfect in the symphony in the hologram that we created. So we don't typically give that much thought to it. We don't give that much consciousness to it. We tend to just say, "Ah, well, I just don't like those people. I just don't want to talk about it. I just don't want to talk about it, or I'm going to become an activist about it." Oh yeah, that's another, like you have vegans, vegetarians, omnivores, you have pescatarians, you have all kinds of like eating. Like we've become so polar about things like, no, my choice is the best and yours stinks and you're a lesser person. I'm a better person because of my choices. But of course, everybody believes that their choice is the best, right? Good morning, Sarah. So, we go through all this stuff and we like spend all this time talking about other people, why they're wrong, why our choice is better, and it's so funny because we do fall into the thing of, oh, no judgment, but, and as soon as somebody says no judgment, but, including myself, I know there's a judgment coming right after that, right? So we get lost in all the energy around that. And it's really humorous when you look at it. We get lost. Think of all the energy we put to judging other people and what we think of their choices and blah, blah, blah. And then we forget. Like we always want to compare with our moral, like our morality or our choices, right? And what we personally believe. Oh, well, there's the odd. It's good and bad or right and wrong. And that again is based in ego, all ego. So, and because the ego's, as I've said many times, my understanding is the ego's job is to explore identity and separation. So all the energies on energy and separation are part of the ego, right? So that's anger, anxiety, fear, shame, blame, judgment, guilt, doubt, sorrow, pain, like all those things, all of them, anything that's a trigger of any sort. And I think even, like levels of happiness and things like that. I mean, all ego. I've never really thought of it that way before. But anything that has this extreme, like, trigger in some way, shape, or form is a judgment, right? When the ego says, oh my God, this is fantastic, that's still a judgment versus that's interesting. But anyhow, it's a discussion at a different moment. Gonna put that on the side. And so, let's see. Sarah says the unconscious knows we're part of the one, so then we feel it's us participating in something we judge so harshly. Right. Right. Which then causes more judgment, right? And Michael says, I feel like we're on a new level to this. Like the judgments have become more expanded. Oh my gosh. So big. The judgments. Yeah, we have hit a new level of judging. But yeah, we get so triggered, and that is part of it is the unconscious or the expanded consciousness knows that, you know, we've created all of these categorizations, we've created all these compartmentalizations, we've created all of these things that we believe are right and wrong. And I always say, well, you can ask 10 people what right and wrong is, and you're going to get 10 different answers. They're never going to be the same. And as long as you have a differential for anything, right, there's an ego involved, because the differential is created by identity and separation and individuality. And we have not only honored it, but we have exalted it in this level of consciousness as we have created this separation and density and this identification in each of those separations, which is what, we are. So then we look at things that we have decided collectively are distasteful, because we do have a collective ego, right? So there's a collective ego that chooses what's, enjoyable and distasteful is the word that comes to mind. Like almost like that. I just don't want to look at that, right? No, it has to be done. It's part of the symphony. It's part of the hologram. But it's going to have to be in a distasteful way, because I just, just think about that. We never really think about the collective ego. So we have a set of individuals who do things that are going to push us to be catalysts in some way, shape, or form. And it's not always, actually, it's most of the time, it is, I forgot what I was going to say. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Most of the time, it's something that we consider negative, but it's a catalyst that pushes us in a different direction. And most of the time, we create it in a way that's like, a propulsion or repulsion versus just a propulsion in terms of, helping us to move ourselves along in a way that is maybe more love based. Seriously, I think extreme rightness has become wrongness. Well, it 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 doesn't feel good. Like here's the thing. I have been sitting with so many things, right? So many things that have come up within me instead of pushing through them or, judging myself and to shift them and whatever. And I just sit with it and say, okay, so what is it? What purpose is it serving, right? And so in many cases, so it feels really awkward for us when we have been doing this active, journey, excuse me, this active spiritual journey with this really, focused effort on being so observant and conscious. And, and it's funny because we still in the background judge being good, being the light. That's what we think. Oh, how many things we call light circles or all this kind of stuff. And it's like, it's the wholeness, and we're still denying that shadow side, which is created by the ego as and explored and observed by the ego and all that kind of stuff. And so we're sort of confused, right? But we get like it's almost like we're getting to this place where we're becoming observant to it, and then we're judging it even more. So then Sarah's talking about extreme rightness. And then we get into these extremes of no, this has to be this way, it can't be this way, and then it becomes this um, evangelical, righteousness, right? And Sarah and I talked about righteousness and ascended world several weeks back, and that's been such an exploration and eye opener in so many ways to say, you know what, when if we just took out the word judgment, right, and even like so, in even observing ourselves to say, oh, look at that, and look at what I'm doing, and look at what's coming up within me. What an interesting judgment. What I've been doing, and Sarah and I have both been doing that, is well, look at my righteousness there instead of saying judgment. And then it's like, oh, well, that just sort of makes you straighten your back up and be like, whoa, wait a minute. So when we get to that, right, it's a matter of stepping back to say, okay, so what is the really big trigger that's come up that's causing this righteousness? Because you know what, it's funny, we can even accept ourselves judging, but when we say that we are righteous, right, in a place of consciousness, it's like, oh yeah, no. And it was funny because I had a conversation with somebody a couple weeks ago about that. And it was funny going, they were talking about something and they're like, oh, well, I try not to judge, but blah, 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 blah. And I said, oh, well, look, that's your righteousness. And they were talking about the righteousness ascended world that Sarah and I had done. And I said, they were like, well, I just don't think I have that. But then in our conversation, they were saying, well, these people are doing this, or I just have been observing my judgment and how these people do this. And I said, so there's your righteousness. And they're like, no, 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 I'm just judging. I'm like, but that's pretty interchangeable because your righteousness is, I am right about this and you are wrong. You are, I'm right about this and all those people are wrong. And how can they not see? There's the righteousness, right? But that's that extreme rightness that we try to really, like, I hear this in the spiritual circles all the time, like, oh, well, what about those people who do this? Well, they're part of this too. What about those? How about this one? I'm just so tired of all those who are asleep. When are they going to wake up? There's righteousness. There's judgment. Those are big triggers, right? To say, oh my gosh, because what do? I'm so overwhelmed. I'm so ragged. I'm so tired. And this also ties into the ascended world that Sarah and I did about being tired or change, too tired to change and stuff. And it's part of the tiredness is that we're putting so much judgment of others. So the key is stepping back. Number one is the observance, right? To see that within ourselves. Number two is to not judge ourselves for judging or having righteousness or whatever, right? Michael says, I feel like there's more momentum behind the judgments these days. I find it's easy to look at judgments if there's not a lot of it. I feel like there's a lot of momentum behind a lot of the judgments that are coming into my view to review. Right. Well, the momentum is like we're picking it up at a collective level, right? Ugh. It is. It's like groups of people, and it doesn't even matter. Like there's just all different kinds. And so part of it is maybe what's coming up to the surface to look at is judgment itself, and how we are righteous, and how we are, evangelical in the way of righteousness, and you're wrong. And Sarah and I talked about a couple weeks ago the whole thing in, like, we've justified righteousness as long as it's in the name of a god or some other greater being or a greater purpose, the greater good, like what we decide is the greater good, right? Which of course is egoic. And so, like, we're so entrenched in it that we've forgotten that it's simply a message to us. So the message is really to step back and say, okay, so can you say, look at somebody who has a very vehemently different perspective than you? Can you say, I disagree with that because or not even I disagree. I have a different perspective on that, and I'm okay with them having theirs. Can you truly say that? Most of us can't when it comes to the bigger things, like what Mike's talking about, the big momentum behind the judgments, right? Because it seems like everything that comes up are these big explosive issues. Nothing is small anymore, right? And then what I found is then when somebody gets worked up in one area, then everything gets worked up in other, because it's that energy that just carries through. And it's time for us to take our words, our focus off of the words and put our focus on the energy. So like what Sarah and I have been talking about in Ascended World is learning to remembering how to, instead of like, putting so much energy into all that, right? Instead, we're talking about how to imbue everything with passion, right? And to find one thing that helps us to remember the embodiment of our own passion, and then to allow it to spread through our entire reality, right? And if we did that, we wouldn't care what anybody else did. And it's almost like the same thing, like, so, but the thing is, when we do that, it's like we think, oh, I have to just find my one passion, and then that's all I have to do. And it's like, no, then it's to take that energy of passion and to allow it to spread and seep into everything else, right? So it's the same thing when we're looking at the bigger picture of judgment, because it's an energy. It is an energy well past the words and thoughts. So good morning, Gloria. So when we get to that place, yes, and when we do our own passion and we get into this place of being in passion and living an impassioned life, we then honor everybody else for choosing theirs. And their passion could be judging. Who knows? Many have that right now. So the key is then to look at then in that same vein, right? When we have judgment, because like I was saying, so what'll happen is we get worked up in one thing, and then it bleeds into other things, right? Have you ever noticed? I'm in a cruddy mood today, and so every interaction I have is cruddy, right? That happens all the time. I am really angry at my spouse or my friend or my kids or whatever, and thus every interaction I have has been marred by that ickiness, right? So it's the same thing with judgment. That's why it's important for us to now step back and to shift our perspective out of being lost in the judgment and not just observing it. Like the first step really is observing it within ourselves, right? The second step is not judging ourselves for having those judgments or that righteousness, but to see it. Seeing it is the key, because when we see it, we can observe it in a way of saying, okay, so what is it showing me, right? And if I take away the words and just focus on the energy, like we're talking about imbuing, passion and everything. So if I have this judgment and I'm just trying to find a place, I'm finding a place to force it in, right? To shoot the arrow at somebody, then what is underneath it for me? Because it's not really the words. It's not really the person or the people. It is something for me to look at in the bigger picture, right? And that's a challenge even for me to say, well, what is that, right? Because the ego goes, well, what is that? But as we focus more and more and we start shifting into that passion, right? Passion mode and passion focus. Like that's really, I feel like Sarah and I've been talking like next year is 2022 is the year of passion. And that's what we are going to be, encouraging everybody to explore. And we're going to programs on that, whatever. But all of this is preparation for that so that we can let go of the things that are all separation based, all external based, and that includes our judgments and our righteousness and everything else. And instead, turn that within to allow ourselves passion and then live it, right? Live it and it let it let it bleed into everything because that's a great way of allowing bleeding, right? It's a great bleed. But the first step is looking at this big because that's why it's come up. I feel like that's why it's come up is that this year has been, if we have like a big theme this year, it's been a year of clear, like bringing up, the gook to the surface to clear. Yeah, be the passion, right? This is the year to, like, it's almost like we have next year holding this space for us now, right? What we are collectively next year is holding a space for us now. And it's like, so when I do the clearing, say like in Trinity and when we do in our classes in the Adventures in Wonderland course, we hold ourselves at the vibration where, and we do that in the Ascended World podcast, we hold ourselves at the vibration where a certain creation is our truth, right? So it's almost like what I'm feeling right now is that what we have deemed or set as coming next year-ish, right, is holding the space for us to get there in the bigger picture. And to do that is for us to really puke up all of this judgment, all of this righteousness, because it just wastes a lot of our energy. I mean, it's productive in the way that it shows us that the things that we're not looking at. But what I feel like, we have September, October, November, December. We have like 3.5 months left. Yeah, because we're in the middle of September now. So we have 3.5 months left of the year. And to put we just put some kind of a structure on it. Like, what if that's what the next 3.5 months is? Because it's funny just sort of hit me. Sarah and I have in our Adventures in Wonderland launching our shadow. So like this month is self-responsibility that we launched, and next month is the shadow, and we're doing an entire course on the shadow, which is going to be fabulous. And of course, how perfect timing if we're looking at it from that perspective, going, okay, time to bring it all up, time to embrace it, time to see the purpose in it, and do it with love and acceptance, and say, look at how perfect and beautiful this hologram is. And to do that, is for us to really embrace, and that's for us to give ourselves the space to be living in passion. So when we look at the energy behind why we judge, why we're judging, why we have righteousness or whatever, that's the first step, because as soon as we shift that, I feel like it makes it much easier to look at somebody and say, I honor your choice, and I allow it to just be a part of that symphony, right? Instead of trying to force somebody else to come into my choice, right? Which is really where we've become very bipolar at. It's like, if you don't agree with me, then you are just a bad person. That's basically what we imply. So, the original discussion with my husband had to do with how do you see as somebody else that you are very in very much disagreement or just don't even understand their perspective on reality. How do you do that? Like when you have a completely different perspective on it. Oh yeah, Sarah, that's nice. Maybe judgment is created from the disconnect of our passion, right? That's one to sit on for today. Oh, we can have a conversation about that. But the discussion started with like, how do you see things from other people's eyes? Like, how do you see their perspective? And it's like, well, you just allow, because if you don't have judgment, I have learned some of the most interesting things, or just realized some of the most interesting things by not having a judgment for somebody who is very different from me. and just sitting and listening to them or getting to know them or being in the same arena as them. And as long as I'm not being, they're not trying to force their perspective on me, and I don't try to force my perspective on them, we can always learn from each other. That's the thing. It's not really, well, it's not really learning, it's remembering. It's helping ourselves have a more saturated, luscious, um, feeling. Oh God, I can't even think of the word. It just feels so saturated and yummy. Like the experience becomes so holographic. Um, so that we can see all, then we can start to see all perspectives. And that's all part of our exploring the shadow within ourselves, right? And that's part of what judgment is stuff that we're denying and putting in the shadows and cracks and crevices. So, oh, look at that. There's something that this is like a precursor to the discussions on shadows that we're going to be having in launching the program, the shadow course in October. But once we start to shift and look at those things and say, what an interesting lesson, how colorful, how fulfilled and holographic that becomes when I add the depth of those shadows, of those cracks and crevices, of those things that we are, that we categorize. What happens when we let go of the categorizations and we just let them be as they are? Like, okay, well, look at that. Look at that. Because you know what? Somebody you think is evil and wrong and bad could think that you're evil and wrong and bad. And both of you can be right. Absolutely, if that's your perspective. The question isn't what the other people really, the other person really is. The question is, what is it that is presenting itself to you that is still, you're still holding out here, as a possibility of understanding, right? Because you're denying yourself from understanding that individual's perspective because, oh, it's so different than mine, and how could they think that, and that's so wrong, and and we can say that about, like, it's funny, we get to a certain point where it's like, oh yeah, I can see about this person or this person or this person, but I can't see with those people. That person just is so different from me, right? So it's either a politician, it can be a culture, right? I can't see how women are, put into, full body coverings and all that kind of stuff, right? Like we talk about stuff like that all the time from culture to culture. And it's like, so we would rather just judge instead of understand, right? Um, and recognize everyone's got their choice and their journey, no matter what their situation looks like. There's self responsibility, which is the course we're doing this month. So if you all this stuff that we're talking about is in the Adventures in Wonderland course that we are doing, the program that has 7 courses that covers all the spectrum of this stuff, so we can get to that place of living the impassioned life. And I don't mean to do that as a shameless plug. I mean, I do and I don't, but it wasn't intended. It's just that it really is all interconnected. And when we get to this place where we're much softer within ourselves, and a place of love and acceptance and embracing and looking at our whole self instead of just the light part, just wanting to attain the light part, but instead also embracing and honoring the shadow side, of the dark part, that we've created in separation. Because if we create shadow whenever we create individuals, we create darkness whenever we create individuality, and so every individual that we have creates more of the darkness. So Michael asks, that's a great question. Michael asks, what does self-responsibility do for judgments? Well, when you're in self-responsibility, then you take full responsibility for your judgments. Then you just say, what we're doing in the self judgment course is covering so many areas, and we even cover collective victimhood, like violence and stuff. That was a tough one to record, but it was really powerful. And we have so many different things. But when we take self responsibility in the creation, right? The idea in self responsibility, doing a whole course on that, is when we always say, well, if I could only do this, or if I could only do that, right? When we take self responsibility for everything in our reality, then we can change it. Um, when we look at others, when we look at others and their judgments or things that we judge or that they judge us for, when we look at things that we judge in self responsibility, it's like, well, I put them in my reality. So here's how it shifts. So I put them in my reality for a purpose because I create my reality. There's my self responsibility. I put them in my reality and they have a message for me because since I create my reality, having is evidence of wanting. So therefore I want them there to show me something that I'm not otherwise looking at. And so see how it has now turned that arrow back in to say, yep, just me, just more of me. And then you start saying, okay, so what is that? Like, what is that about? And what is that about? What am I looking at? What am I missing? And that's like, we're starting to ask some pretty challenging, deep questions that we're not used to looking at as we peel away those layers of judgment. And we go through the forgiveness, we have the forgiveness course as part of the program, and we peel away all then we get into worthiness, we get into trust, we get into guidance and how to listen and see guidance, and then it's the forgiveness and self-responsibility and the acceptance and love of the shadow to get to this place of self-love, of which is really the unconditional self-love, which is really the presence and being that passion and being that divine presence. And when we do that, we have no room for judgment anymore, right? And that all we have is gratitude for anything that shows up in our reality, including moments of judgment. And those, so yeah, so you see how that changes all of our judgments is when we take full self-responsibility. It's like, well, they're my reality to show me something that I'm still denying within myself. Because energetically, when we stop denying these things within ourselves that we bury so deeply that we just create judgments to, express out to everybody, when we stop doing that and we just keep on saying, nope, that's me. Yep, me again, me again, me one more time. When we do that, it takes all of the power of the judgment away. And then we do start to just understand others and have gratitude for them, even if they're diametrically opposite of where we are, because they are still us and they are another representation of what we've created as balance in the hologram of this set of dimensions and in this multiverse of duality. So then it's a place of gratitude to say, okay, so they brought some kind of balance. It's like the discussion of, oh my goodness, I didn't realize we were over 30 minutes already. The discussion of like in Star Wars, which happened in multiple movies of it. It's like for every Jedi, there's a Sith. For every Sith, there's a Jedi. So to create balance, right, in the Force, which is the universe or divine consciousness, whatever you want to call it. And that's what we do. Like the more light we create, the more darkness we create. The more things we create with the perception and the judgment of light, the more things we create with the perception and judgment of dark. So when we start taking all that responsibility and start accepting it all as the whole, bringing it back into ourselves and accepting ourselves as the dark and the light, then we stop judging, and then all of these polarities start going away, and it just sort of becomes all of that one wholeness again. So that's something to sit on this week. There's a lot. And when we stop judging and when we really focus on all of that, and I think what we're really getting up to, which makes me sort of tired thinking about, which means it's huge, is the resolution of collective judgment. And that's for all of us. That's on all of us to do because we're part of the collective, obviously. So we can, and we believe it's too hard. It's not. It's as easy as doing it within ourselves because every macro, micro is all equal. So one will reflect the other. And so when we do all that, then we stop trying to manipulate our realities because of judgments. And that's something Sarah and I have talked about, which I think is probably maybe part of what we're going to talk about next week in Ascended World, but we'll see. Because it's just all interrelated and it's just challenging to pull it all out. into, sometimes, yeah, like I was like, okay, well, all right. I don't know why this came up, but all right, because we talk about judgment all the time. But this is a good topic because it really does feel like Michael said, we're getting to another level of all of this. So it's really important because we've cleared out a lot of stuff. So that's good. And well, I don't like to even judge it as good. I mean, it's awesome because it's progress and it's okay. So we have cleared out a whole bunch of stuff and now we're dealing with some really big stuff. And now it's time for us to deal with it and realize it's all within ourselves too. And to see what's underneath that so that we can sort of grasp, because nothing, you got to stop looking at things almost like day to day, even though we are being pushed in such presence into day to day right now. Like this whole year and this last 2 years has been a lot about pushing ourselves into the presence of right now, and that is truly only where we exist in the bigger scheme of the collective consciousness, right? And if you like, next year is right now too. There is no time and space, right? So if we start feeling like there's an energy where we're holding ourselves collectively in a space there, which in our minds where we do linear calculations would be next year, right? We're holding this space to do the clearing, to get rid of all the gunk that's preventing us, that would otherwise prevent us from being in that reality. And it's funny because it's the first time I've seen it that way, but it's very powerful. And it's like, okay, so then let's allow it. Let's just puke it up and let it go, right? But it's been very challenging and painful from the ego's perspective for many. So it's all about letting go of these things, seeing them in different perspectives, and resolving them within ourselves. So I'm going to let you go. And on that, I want you to sit with that this week and look at your judgments. Look at the things where your ego says, yeah, but this is totally right. Like, yeah, like, okay, I get that, but this is totally right. That's the thing to look at. So look at that. And there's going to be tons to talk about. Oh, there's just so much that's starting to come up. So sit in that, and then I will see you next week. This is Angela Coulter signing off with this week's Living the Shift. Have a great one. Bye.